In the world of professional motorsport, few stories carry as much weight as the one quietly unfolding around one of NASCAR's most decorated competitors. Tonight, we examine the circumstances surrounding Kyle Busch, a two-time Cup Series champion, a driver with more than 100 victories in the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, and a racer whose career accomplishments place him among the most celebrated figures this sport has ever produced. Despite those credentials, despite that history, and despite a recent Truck Series victory that demonstrated he remains as sharp and competitive as ever, Kyle Busch is currently facing a challenge that has nothing to do with speed, talent, or desire. The challenge, as those close to the situation have now openly acknowledged, is sponsorship. And the implications of that reality reach far beyond one driver, one season, or one missed opportunity. This is not a story about decline. This is not a story about a driver who has lost his edge or whose time in the sport is winding down on his own terms. What this story is about is the business side of NASCAR, a side that increasingly is making itself felt even at the highest levels of the sport, even among names that most fans would assume are insulated from such concerns. The fact that a driver of Kyle Busch's stature is unable to secure a seat in NASCAR's Tier 2 division without outside sponsorship falling into place first is a development that speaks volumes about the current financial landscape of professional stock car racing. It is a development that deserves serious attention, and that is exactly what we will give it tonight. To understand the full picture, it is important to begin with what has actually been confirmed. Samantha Busch, Kyle Busch's wife, recently participated in an Ask Me Anything session on Instagram. During that session, she addressed questions about her husband's racing schedule and ambitions in a candid and straightforward manner. She stated that she loves watching Kyle compete in the 8 truck races he is running this year with Spire Motorsports, and she made clear that racing is simply who he is, it is what drives him. However, she also shared a detail that immediately drew attention from the NASCAR community. She confirmed that if sponsorship could be secured, Kyle Busch would run as many races as possible in the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series as well. That single statement reframed the entire conversation around where Kyle Busch stands in this sport right now. It made plain that the barrier between Busch and more racing opportunities is not a lack of willingness, not a lack of physical capability, and not a lack of competitive drive. The barrier is funding. Consider what that means in full context. Kyle Busch is a 2-time NASCAR Cup Series champion. He is a driver who has accumulated more than 100 wins in the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, a number that reflects years of dominance across multiple levels of the sport. He is someone who, not long ago, operated his own team, Kyle Busch Motorsports, which gave him a level of autonomy and access that few drivers in the history of the sport have enjoyed. When he owned that team, he had the ability to place himself in races across NASCAR's lower divisions whenever it suited him. He had guaranteed seats, he had infrastructure, he had control. That era, however, is over. After selling the team, the structure that once provided those automatic opportunities disappeared along with it. What replaced it was a reality that many professional drivers know all too well. A reality in which seat availability in NASCAR's secondary divisions depends heavily on whether the right sponsor is willing to commit the necessary resources at the right time. The numbers attached to this situation are particularly striking. Kyle Busch has not run a single event in NASCAR's Tier 2 division since 2024. For a driver who was once a consistent presence across multiple NASCAR series simultaneously, that absence represents a significant and notable shift. It is a shift that is not driven by any reduction in competitive ability, as his Truck Series results make clear. It is driven entirely by the economics of the sport, by the fact that even a driver with his resume cannot simply walk into a ride in NASCAR's second-tier series without the financial backing to support it. This situation also draws attention to a broader trend that is reshaping the business of NASCAR racing. The sport's sponsorship climate, by all accounts, has become more demanding and more selective. Sponsors today are strategic in how they allocate their investments. Teams operate with tightly managed development pipelines. The financial commitments required to field competitive entries at any level of NASCAR are substantial, and the competition for available sponsorship dollars is intense. In that environment, even veteran drivers, even champions with proven track records and enormous name recognition, are not automatically guaranteed opportunities outside of their primary contracts. Kyle Busch's primary commitment remains intact. He is a full-time competitor in the NASCAR Cup Series with Richard Childress Racing, and that seat is secure. But the desire to race more, to compete in additional events in the Truck Series and the O'Reilly Series, runs directly into the financial realities described above. And for fans who have followed this sport through his career, the image of Kyle Busch waiting on sponsorship to fall into place before he can take on more racing is one that is difficult to reconcile with the dominance he has shown across nearly every level of stock car competition. What has happened since his departure from team ownership, and what the latest developments in NASCAR's sponsorship environment suggest about the road ahead for veterans like Busch, is a story that continues to develop. When we return, we will take a closer look at the Truck Series victory that put this conversation back in the spotlight, the role his Spire Motorsports teammate Carson Hocevar played in that result, and what it all means as both drivers prepare to face one another again in a very different setting, this time in the Cup Series at Echo Park Speedway. When Kyle Busch climbed out of his truck following his recent victory in the NASCAR Craftsman Series, the scene was one that longtime fans of the sport have witnessed many times before. A seasoned, accomplished competitor celebrating a win with a kind of energy and intensity that has defined his career across decades of professional racing. There was nothing subdued about it. There was nothing that suggested a driver going through the motions or simply filling a schedule. What was visible to anyone paying attention was a racer who was fully engaged, fully committed, and fully capable of competing at a high level. That matters because it provides essential context for the larger story surrounding his current situation. The sponsorship challenges he faces off the track have done nothing to diminish what he is able to accomplish on it. The Truck Series victory itself was not simply a solo performance. It unfolded in a way that highlighted the dynamic between Kyle Busch and his Spire Motorsports teammate, Carson Hocevar. Understanding how that dynamic played out over the course of the race is important because it reveals something about both drivers and because it sets the stage for what comes next when the two of them are no longer on the same side of the equation. From early in the race, Carson Hocevar established himself as an aggressive presence on the track. Those who follow NASCAR closely will recognize that description as fitting what Hocevar has consistently shown throughout his time in the sport. He was slicing through traffic, making bold moves, and pushing the limits of what the racing situation allowed. Kyle Busch, observing his teammates' approach from his own position in the field, offered a perspective on Hocevar's driving that was notable for what it revealed. Busch described Hocevar's style during that early phase as normal Carson, meaning that the aggression was not reckless or out of control, but rather a deliberate, calculated approach to advancing through the field. Busch even drew a comparison to his own driving style from earlier in his career, framing Hocevar's intensity as the kind of boundary pushing that characterizes a young, hungry racer who is confident in his abilities and willing to take calculated risks to gain positions. That framing is significant. It suggests that Busch does not view Hocevar's aggressive style as a problem or a liability, but rather a recognizable trait, one that when properly directed can be an asset rather than a liability. And as the race progressed, the dynamic between the two Spire Motorsports teammates evolved in a way that reinforced that interpretation. During the second stage of the race, the relationship between Busch and Hocevar shifted in a meaningful way. Rather than operating as two separate competitors pursuing individual strategies, the two drivers began functioning as a coordinated unit. Kyle Busch took on the role of wingman, working to support Hocevar's position and helping the pair of them maintain an advantage over the rest of the field. It was a tactical adjustment, and it worked. The two teammates managed to figure each other out on the fly, developing an understanding of how to work together in real time, without the benefit of extensive prior coordination. For two competitors who came into the race as teammates but who had not necessarily established that kind of working chemistry before, it was a notable development. Then came the moment that ultimately decided the outcome of the race. When the situation demanded it, when the window to make a decisive move was open, Hocevar provided Kyle Busch with the push he needed to take the lead and secure the victory. That contribution did not go unnoticed. Busch acknowledged it directly after the race, expressing genuine appreciation for what his teammate had done, and specifically noting that he was glad to see Hocevar demonstrate the maturity to recognize the moment and respond to it by working together rather than competing against his own teammate.
That kind of acknowledgement from a two-time Cup Series champion carries weight. It is not a generic compliment, it is a specific observation about a younger driver's ability to read a situation and make the right call under pressure. For Hocevar, the moment was equally significant. Being recognized by a driver of Busch's stature for showing that level of racing intelligence is the kind of experience that can accelerate a young competitor's development. It confirms that the instinct to collaborate at the right moment, even in an inherently competitive environment as stock car racing, is a quality that the sport's most accomplished veterans value and respect. The victory, when it came, was the product of that collaboration. Kyle Busch crossed the finish line as the winner, with a performance that demonstrated as clearly as any result could that his competitive capabilities remain fully intact. The Truck Series win added another entry to a career record that already stands among the most impressive in NASCAR history, and it did so in a manner that showcased not just raw speed, but also the kind of racecraft and situational awareness